The Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards, every Thursday at 6:15 on Goliath Radio. Gwen Azama-Edwards, retired city clerk, former city commissioner, city of Daytona Beach. The Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards on Goliath Radio.
Stand, stand, stand. Stan, you've been sitting much too long, much too long. Welcome, 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 welcome to Truth, a radio program designed with you in mind, a program whose sole purpose is to empower you, our listeners, for information leads to knowledge, and knowledge is power. And as I listen sometimes to the videos that I have that you can get to, link to on my website at www.gwen-truth.com. And every so often I said that truth is power, knowledge is truth, and all this kind of it all goes together. Knowledge is power, and that knowledge should be truth, right? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So go to the website at www.gwen-truth.com so you can access all of those resource listings that will link you to powerful sites that will give you that powerful information to make you all powerful. Amen. Also go there so you can chime in on the query that we have going, and that query is asking you, of course, in line with the economic upswing. Some would call it a slow coast or whatever, you know, but they're all pretty much saying that things are turning around, that they're getting better, okay? My question to you is, personally, are things getting better for you? Are they getting better for you? And I'd love for you to go to the website to respond to that and chime in on it, as I say. www.gwen-truth.com, and then you can also see all those wonderful links that are there to link you to the all-powerful sites that make you all-powerful. As has been stated, I'm Gwen Azama-Edwards, former city commissioner, retired city clerk, city of Daytona Beach, author, minister. That's not just why I say amen and hallelujah a lot, but it's tied to it, I'm sure, and also community volunteer. Our guest tonight is an individual that I have a great deal of respect for. Really, you know, I would say 99% of the people I bring on this show I have a great deal of respect for. But I do have a great deal of respect for this individual, Andrew Spar. Andrew is the president of the Volusia Teachers Organization. And yes, that is a teachers union, but it is a place where he not only looks after the interests of the teachers, and I think you would agree with this, Andrew, you look after the interests of the students as well, because the teachers care about the students.
Yeah, I say that all the time. One of the best things about my job is that I get to work with teachers, and when teachers' first and primary concern is the students, it makes my job a lot easier. So
absolutely.
I enjoy it.
And I know that, you know, people truly, especially those who are members of the unions, are continually and constantly being thrown under the bus. But there are reasons, I always say, and people agree that there were reasons for unions to get started, number one. But given even what is going on now, there are reasons for the continuance of these organizations. And it's good for people to remember that those unions not only look after the interests of their membership, but they also look after the interests of that for which they exist, not the unions, but the organizations themselves. A lot is happening in the field of education, and you and I were talking briefly before the show started in terms of Common Core, in terms of what's happening in meeting the class size amendment What's happening in Volusia County for kind of an update for individuals?
Sure. So school is right around the corner.
I think August 19th.
Yeah, Monday, August 19th.
Whoa.
I think it is. It's the first day of school.
Volusia
which-
Flagler, I think, are the same.
Yeah, a lot of the state actually comes back on that day, and so that's a little over a week away, and so new teachers actually started this week in Volusia County. A little over 300 new teachers so far have been hired. There is still well over 80 positions being advertised right now to be filled. There are some positions that are being filled as we speak, so they're in transit. So by the time this is said and done, Volusia County will start the year with probably close to or a little over 400 new teachers in Volusia County.
And that's not only exciting because we want to see more teachers in place so we can meet that class size amendment. We don't want to pay any more money out as we did this past term.
Correct.
And we know that the county is still looking at and dealing with budget issues. What's your take on that as far as the budget is concerned?
Well, look, Volusia County, as with most school districts, has been struggling for many years, really since the 2007-2008 school year. That's when the economy started to tank. Volusia County that year barely got by, and then after that we saw cuts coming from the state, and of course lower property values meant lower revenues coming from local property taxes. And so Volusia County went through a period of reductions. At one point, we had almost 5,200 teachers in Volusia County. This year, we'll probably increase a little bit to around 4,250, 4,300 teachers maybe. But are clearly almost 1,000 teachers below where our high point was. In addition to that, there were a lot of cuts in administration. There were a lot of cuts in support services, such as clerical and paraprofessionals who work in the classrooms. We know that the district, against what we thought was a good idea, they outsourced custodians recently. They handed over that control to a private company. And so, that has occurred as well. So there's been a lot of program cuts. And one of the things that people don't think about all the time is when you're cutting those people and you're cutting those programs, those are programs that are there to help students be more successful. One such program that was this year is going to be fully restored was the AVID program.
Yes.
Which is a program that really targets at-risk youth who are being successful to ensure that they stay successful and eventually make it to college. And so that was a program that was cut. There have been a lot of tutoring and additional type of supports for students programs that have been cut. Our educational ESE services, our special education programs, have been dramatically pared back because of revenue shortfalls, and they continue to shrink those services. And these are students who are struggling, who may have a learning disability of some kind, who really need some more support, and that support's having to be delivered in a different way. And I get very concerned, as a lot of other teachers do, of the disservice we may be doing to those students because of these budget cuts. With that said, this year has been probably the first year in a long time that we may be moving in a more positive direction. So as I said, the AVID program has been fully restored. It used to be paid out of federal funds, Title I funds. It's now being moved to the general fund, so the general fund's able to help support that program. And so we're going to see, hopefully, the next few years, we'll start seeing this investment back in public education. Florida ranks dead last or near the bottom in funding for public education. And that, of course, adds to the struggle that we have here in Florida. No one has ever said, hey, Florida's doing a great job. And interestingly enough, in funding, during this economic downturn, what most states did is they leveled off funding, where Florida actually cut funding significantly. I mean, we're not back where we were. Florida cut $4 billion with a B out of public education funding in the state. And as of now, as of this year, they have restored $3 billion of that. So we're still $1 billion behind
where we were. When you were still in need of additional funding, right? Because we were still near the bottom, or at or near the bottom. And this billion that the governor and legislature gave you all actually was just a return in terms of what had been cut, in part.
Absolutely.
In part. You and I were talking too about you and I were talking about teachers and the value of teachers, and many times I believe in terms of public employees overall, but I'm going to say in particular in regards to teachers, because teachers are near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure they should be, I know, and maybe are to a lot of other people as well. But a lot of people, we get caught up in the union thing and what they consider as demands. And we forget, in truth, just what it means to be a teacher and what teachers do, and not just in terms of their contributions, but in terms of what they do and the impact they have on children. And as I shared with you, I mean, if we think about the fact as parents, in fact, I had Judge Grimes on last week, and we were, in his book, he talks about the fact that parents only spend about 20 minutes of quality time with their children. And when you think about the teacher who has those students for, you're saying 6 hours a day, and they've got to keep them interested and enthused somewhat, make sure they're doing their work and the like, and they really have to get their, not just their attention, but almost, grab at the heartstrings a little bit to get them to want to actually, get involved and do the work. And it's at times, I think, a thankless job. And I truly believe that we as parents, and I did back when, my sons were younger, we as parents really should think more about that, about these individuals who are not babysitting your kids. What they're doing is actually trying to instill in them something that they can use not only now but in the future as they progress through the years, but also in their adulthood.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And first let me back up and talk a little bit about the union. We're not the big bad union that everyone likes to, that some people like to make us out to be. And actually, I wish we had a fraction of the power that some people say we have. But here's what I will say. You know what? Florida is a right to work, or as I call it, right to work for less state. No one has to join a union in the state of Florida. And our membership here in Volusia County has been over 70% for the last 6 years. In fact, right now it's a little over 73% of the teachers in Volusia County belong to the union. And they make that conscious decision to do that.
And people should understand that even those who are not a part of the union, they benefit from...
They get some of the benefits,
right,
there's no question. And if they all were part of the union, I would argue we would have even better working conditions. We'd have more say in what's going on. But the union is a way that teachers get their voice. As one individual out of 4,200 teachers, out of a district with 7,000 employees, it's kind of hard to have your voice heard. And the way to amplify that is, in fact, through coming together, being unified, and to make change and to advocate for things. Unions are what allow teachers to advocate for students, to advocate what should be going on in their classroom. And look, if teachers didn't believe in the value of the union, they wouldn't join. They don't have to in the state of Florida. And when 73% of the teachers make that conscious decision to do so, and I would argue many more would had we not had this downturn in the economy, I think we would see higher union membership numbers. When they make that decision, that really does go to show, I think, and should show everyone, the fact that we truly are speaking on behalf and trying to amplify that voice that teachers need to have. So let me weave that into what you were just talking about. I believe personally, that one student failing is one too many. Losing one student in the system is one too many, and I believe most teachers believe that. I also believe that when one student fails, it's indicative of a failing system. So now let's talk about the system, because people like to talk about the system as the school district, but that's not the system. The system is, in fact, the teachers and the support staff and the administrators in the school district, but it's also the parents, it's also businesses, and it's also the community. And so when one student fails, or our students are failing, it is our entire system with all of those parts that are not working together to really ensure the betterment of our students. When students are successful, and you look at schools that are successful, they have actively, highly trained teachers, of course, who are engaged. They have good leadership and administration. They have great support systems in place with their support staff. They have actively engaged parents. They have a community that's supportive. They have businesses that invest in the school. And when all of that's happening, what do we see? Success. And then we look at our schools that are struggling. And typically what you see there is you'll see teachers who are working as hard as they can, a lot of times with limited experience, relatively new teachers often in our struggling schools. You'll see management that's constantly turning over as well as true with support staff. You see lack of parent engagement. You see no community involvement, and you see no business support. And we wonder why those schools are struggling and these other schools are doing so well. But just look at the schools and look at the differences, and that's what you see. When our struggling schools turn it around, like I was part of at Turiti Small, I'm glad to be part of it. You had teachers and administrators working together. So even though parents may not have been as engaged as we would like, and the community and the businesses weren't as engaged as we would like, because some elements were working together and the wheels were turning, we were able to really start to raise that level of our student performance. But it's not enough. And that's what we have to really talk about. How do we engage more? How do we do things? A lot of the practices that have been adopted by this state recently, I think, are counter, and by the reform movement in general, are counter to success in the classroom. When we create high-stakes environments, that goal is to place blame on people who are working as hard as they can. You create an environment that is not in the best interest of students. We are over-testing students right now. We are testing students, quite honestly now, we're testing students with FCAT that's not measuring the new standards we have in Common Core, so there's a misalignment there. We're implementing these new standards, which takes time for teachers to learn and to be able to increase their ability to perform proper instruction on these new standards and at the level that we have. And so when you have all of those things coming on and then you throw this high stakes nature involved in everything, that's not good for teachers, it's not good for students, it harms the progress that we're trying to make in our schools. And when we look at who tends to push that kind of stuff, it's not educators. And so why aren't we listening to the educators in the field? And we've talked about this before, you know, if you go to the doctor and you listen to what your doctor's saying, and the doctor assesses the situation, they listen, they look at what's going on, they do an examination of their patient or view, and then they say, okay, here's what I think you need to do. You know, you need to exercise more. You need to, maybe we need to put you on this prescription. Maybe you need to go see another specialist. And in education, we tell teachers what the prescription is. You know, these people from Tallahassee are telling teachers what the prescription is before they even know what really the assessment is. So, you know, those are kinds of things that I think frustrate teachers to no end, is the fact that, you know, as a profession, we're not given the profession, we're given all the blame. I would say we have 100% of the blame, but 0% of the say as to what's going on in the classroom.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about on my way to the show had to do with us helping listeners to understand just how this hierarchy is in place in terms of decisions that are made about what is to be taught and how it's to be taught. We've got the Florida legislature, we've got the State Department of Education, we have our school board, we have our, you know, the teachers organization. Who decides how that, and I know the answer, but I want the listeners to hear what the answer is. Who decides just how, what's going to be taught in the school system and basically how it's run? And there may be two answers on that, but share.
Well, let's start with what's going on at the national level today. Common Core standards, and there's been some outcry against Common Core standards. We support Common Core standards. And if you actually look at Common Core standards, it came from the National Governors Association. The idea that we needed to have some kind of standard across this nation, and it's not new. We had Blueprint 2000, people may remember, which also was a set of national standards, so it's not like a terribly new concept, but it is a concept of truly changing how the standards are presented. And what we like about the standards, even though it presents its challenges, what we like about the standards is that it really is talking about narrowing what we're teaching in each of the disciplines. So in this case, in reading and math right now, the concept is narrowing what we're teaching, but trying to ensure that students truly understand what they're doing. So for a long time, many of us may remember back to elementary school when we learned our multiplications tables, or times tables as some people call them. But when we learned our multiplication tables, it was, you know, memorization. You just needed to memorize them and you were done. As long as you memorized them, you were good. And really what we're trying to say today is, yeah, they need to know their multiplications tables, but they need to know why 3 times 2 is 6. They don't need to just know that 3 times 2 is 6. They need to know that 3 times 2 is 6 because it's 3 groups of 2, or it's 2 groups of 3, and what that looks like and what that means. And so it's teaching that kind of concept to a much higher level and a much more detailed level, which is good for students. It's good for students because, and a lot of this, what most people don't realize, when the Governors Association put this out, it was at the request of businesses who were saying, we need employees today who can really solve problems, who can truly understand what they're doing and why something works the way it does or doesn't, who can read a manual and understand complex text and manuals with the way technology is today and be able to do those kinds of things. And so that's what ultimately, you know, that's why we have Common Core standards. So states got to adopt them. Florida is one of the states that did. Most states in the nation did. Only 3 did not. I think it was Alaska, Texas, and I think it was either Arizona or New Mexico. I can't remember. But 3 states didn't adopt the Common Core standards. All other states did adopt Common Core standards. So Florida adopted it, and then it comes down to, okay, now we have the new standards. We need a curriculum to match it. The standards are not curriculum. They're setting goals. This is what we want kids to know and when we want them to know it. Now you need a curriculum to go with it. Well, we still don't have a curriculum to go with it. Nowhere, I think, in this country has a curriculum to go with these new standards. So we're kind of saying to teachers, look, go back to the old-fashioned kind of teaching, where you actually look at the standards and figure out what you can do as a group of teachers, which in some ways is very exciting. The only problem is that teachers for the past, I don't know, 15, 20 years have been told only teach what's in the textbook, and you got to cover what's in the textbook, and you got to make sure you do this. And now we've kind of transformed that, and again, that means we have to change how we're thinking and how we train and support teachers. And so the district, then of course, the state has to lay out some of the curriculum that they would like to see adopted in the state of Florida, textbooks or materials, and then school districts pick from that as to what they want to see in their school system, and then teachers then get to work with that and figure out what's best for their students. But typically in the past it's been very prescriptive. So one of the things we are starting to see with Common Core is we're seeing districts move away from being so prescriptive as to what teachers need to do. But then again, this comes back to needing to provide time and dialogue for teachers to really learn from each other, support each other, strategize, and figure out what's best for teaching students. We were talking briefly just before the show about the fact that, you know, what most people don't realize is teachers don't get to just teach. They actually, what we call now, differentiate the instruction. When they're teaching, they have to be able to say, okay, this is what I'm teaching, but I need to know how I'm going to enhance this instruction for those students who are getting it and need to be challenged more, and then remediate the instruction for those students who are struggling and falling behind. And so they have to do that within the classroom. So even though they may only have 18 students, they may have students spread out across 3 or 4 levels, which means they need to be able to address that with those 18 students within the confines of the amount of time they have in the course of the day.
And in truth, if we think about education, if I think even back to, you know, umpteen years back when I was in the classroom, this is a kind of a time-honored thing that teachers do. I mean, that's something they've always had to make some adjustments with those who, you know, may learn at different paces. And as a result, one of the other things I was asking you about, even with the smaller class size, do the teachers have the teacher's aide or teacher assistants, which have a new name now?
Yeah, they're called paraprofessionals, which is what used to be a teacher assistant or a teacher aide, right? And we used to have them in kindergarten first and some in 2nd grade. They don't exist anymore in those grade levels. We do have them in our some of our special education classrooms because there are students with high needs in those classrooms, students with sometimes learning disabilities and sometimes physical disabilities or both. And so in those classrooms we do have paraprofessionals, but not nearly the number. It's a fraction of what we used to have in terms of support there. And quite honestly, we also have a fraction of the support we used to have in terms of resources for students as well. psychologists, guidance counselors, social workers, speech and language pathologists. Actually, our district is having a real problem with speech and language pathologists, so students who may be having some speech issues, developmental delays in terms of speech, and so therefore they would need a teacher who would work with them, a speech clinician who can work with them. And quite honestly, our district, I think, has 5 or 6 vacancies that they have not been able to fill.
Wow.
And this goes back, this has been going on for the last couple of years, actually.
Because those are things that actually will not only hold a student back in terms of their ability to speak, but it has an impact on their self-image, you know, their self-concept, etc. So the impact really is tremendous as you think of the current, present, as far as the future as well. You know, we talk a lot about, and you know, I hate to keep harping on budget, but we hear a lot. That's what we hear in terms of education, the budget, you know, how much they're short this and short that. And we know for Volusia County, as well as some areas around the state, the population, the student population has been dropping over the years. And I did finally see something in the paper where someone hit the nail on the head and said that, you know, it's not the school system's fault that the number of students is dropping. You have to look at the entire county. You know, there are workers that are leaving the area, probably more so than those that are coming to the area. We may be starting to see a change in that somewhat. But there are things that draw people to the area and things that keep them away from the area and draw them to other areas, and the school system cannot be held responsible for that.
Well, you know, look, there's no doubt that during this economic downturn, it hit Volusia County hard. Not just the school district, but the county itself. The economic community, the community in general suffered in terms of the economics. We saw a lot of foreclosures in Volusia County. We saw a lot of people moving out because the jobs dried up. We have been a very service-based industry. I'm excited by what I'm starting to see in terms of the regrowth, but actually the project that's exciting me the most, quite honestly, is the one with Embry-Riddle. And the idea of bringing high-paid jobs, high-level jobs. But they're going to have a problem if we don't invest in our school system, because people don't want to come to an area that doesn't have a good quality of life. And part of that quality of life is ensuring that they can get a quality education for their children. I think we have great teachers in Volusia County. I think we have a great school district, but we have our challenges. And as the economy turned, we had more students in need, more students slipping into poverty, and we weren't able to provide that safety net that we had been providing in years past. So while student enrollment in Volusia County has dropped about 4,000 students over the last 6 years, I think it's starting to level off. The district's projecting again a slight decrease again into this year of about 600 students. We'll see. Right now there's some promising indications that maybe it won't be as big a drop as they were saying. And home buying is back up and values are going back up. So, you know, we'll have to see how some of this plays out. But I think Volusia County is starting to finally head in the right direction, economically speaking. I think we have a long way to go. I mean, building hotels is nice, but that does not tend to increase the quality of life of a community if we're continuing to pay low wages. And if we don't start increasing those wages, we're not going to have people who can support local businesses, who can increase the tax base, who can spend money in the community, and which in turn helps the school district. And you know, our school district, while I think this year financially is going to be a better year for our school district, we are still not restoring many of the cuts that we have cut that I think we do, because we're shortchanging our students right now.
And when we don't have the better paying jobs, we're not able to retain the young people who end up leaving the area.
That was
and
a problem.
Not staying here.
Yeah, that was a problem I talked about last year. I was seeing a very large number of our young teachers leaving Volusia County because their spouses, boyfriends, what have you, girlfriends were getting jobs, couldn't get jobs here. So they were getting jobs in Atlanta or in Charlotte, North Carolina, or in Texas or in other states, and they were going. And they were going elsewhere, and because they couldn't stay here. And I'm always surprised when we got such universities as Bethune-Cookman, Embry-Riddle, Stetson, who, you know, those universities have people come in from out of the area to attend the school, and as soon as they're done, they hightail it out of town. You know, we're a university community in that sense, with 3 really high-quality higher education institutions there, plus Daytona State, also a high quality education institution, although Daytona State usually is more towards students who are here rather than students coming in. But we should have an incredible economic engine around that, and I think we miss that opportunity too often. I just think we've missed that opportunity, and we've got to figure out a way as a community that invests in that, because when we do that, I think ultimately we'll be helping our schools, and when we put education as a high priority in this community, we'll be able to do that as well.
Absolutely, and we also, for several of those universities, they have a large number, not a super large and not as large as it used to be, but international students also come here.
Absolutely.
And those international students can help us with the draw of bringing not only tourism here, but they actually could be ones who would remain in the area.
That's right.
Continue their education and become some of the doctors and lawyers, etc., that we also need. And the medical industry, as big a growth as the health industry is, we really need more of them. We're at a point where we're going to be short of doctors and nurses, etc.
Absolutely.
A great area and occupation for individuals who are really desirous of having a position in a profession that will take them into the future, the far and distant future. Let's talk just a moment, though, about the legislators and legislation and the like. I know you know this because you're up there when the legislators are in session and the like, and we've already talked about how Florida, in terms of funding, is at the bottom or near the bottom. What is it that you see that may be coming and that people should be alert to in terms of education as far as the legislature is concerned? I know in terms of alternative forms of education, and we used to, when we talked about alternative, this was where the bad or the kids who were in trouble went. Now I'm talking about the online training that goes on, which the state has an online system, and I see where they're cutting back on their staff. We have other forms of choice that's out there for individuals like charter schools and the like. How is this hurting? How is it helping in terms of education?
So, as a rule, I think it's hurting. What the rationale behind some of this, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it, it's profiteering. Mm-hmm. It's figuring out a way to profit off of our kids and to do education on the cheap. That's what a lot of this move is about. You look at online learning, it does serve a role. There's no question about that. Online learning serves a purpose and a role in the quality of education and ability to offer classes. Some of our high schools can't offer as many foreign language classes as we might like, or certain types of science classes. And so if there's a venue in which we can provide that, it makes sense to do it that way. But setting arbitrary things like you must take one online course, or two, I think it is now, online courses before you graduate high school. For students who struggle and that's not their learning mentality, why would we do that? I mean, if we're all about the kids, we should be talking about the ways that students learn better. So if students do learn better through an online mechanism, then let's examine that. If they don't, why would we force them to do it?
Right.
I think there have to be different ways. As teachers in a classroom, we know that there's different learning styles, and we know we have to adjust that for our students. And so I just think that kind of thing has to come into place. Charter schools, there's always this attempt to expand and grow the number of charter schools because that's the solution, supposedly. That's the silver bullet. Well, charter schools have been around for a while now. And what we find is that an overwhelming percentage of them do no better, over 80% do no better, and over 30% do worse than our public schools. And the 20%, or less than 20%, that do better than our public schools tend to be very specialized charter schools with financial support from outside the regular school funding. So, what's really happening is that we're not changing the venue of public education. We're trying to find ways to do it on the cheap. And let's face it, the biggest cost savings that you see in charter schools is they tend to pay less and provide less benefits to employees. And also, therefore, it makes it harder for them even to attract quality teachers. So, I think those are some of the things that we have to deal with and be real with. And, Charter schools are run by private management companies. So although they're nonprofit charter schools in the state of Florida, they're called nonprofit, the companies that run them are for-profit. And they charge the charter school fees for running the charter school. And they get to make money off of that purpose. Public schools do not make money. They're not a money-making venture. Yes, we pay employees, but we tend, interestingly enough, some of the charter schools, one of the charter schools that the district just moved to close, which was Boston Amity Charter School in DeLand, that charter school, as I understand it, had 5 managers working in a charter school with 300 students. Many of our elementary schools that are that small have a part-time principal and assistant principal who are split between schools. So to have 5 managers running a school that are making in those cases, they were making pretty, as my understanding, was pretty high salaries. That becomes a concern. And there have been issues. There was the charter school that closed down in Orlando, where the principal there walked away with $500,000 of the charter school's money while it was closing down. In addition to that, they had hired her husband as a consultant, and he was paid, I believe, $150,000. This is public money going to a private entity and lining the pockets of individuals. While people may argue whether or not people in Volusia County schools are overpaid, you can have that debate, but it's, when you really look at the value of what we're getting, it's a pretty darn good deal.
Yeah.
And it's controlled by the public. And there's been a move in Tallahassee to actually require to use taxpayer dollars. And in fact, there are some taxpayer dollars that are used to build charter schools, to actually build the infrastructure of the buildings that some of these charter schools are housed in. And when you build them and you give it over to those charter schools, they now own that building. It's not publicly owned at that point. And so therefore, if the charter school goes down and goes bankrupt, or they close it, or whatever the case may be, the management company owns the building and gets to make money off the building.
Oh, geez. None of that seems truly fair. Explain, if you would, because you hear people who talk about the students who by choice leave the public school system, go into a private school or to one of the charter schools or whatever, and how that money follows them.
So,
public money.
If they go to a private school, it typically doesn't, but then of course the school district loses the money accordingly. And let's face it, although there's a per student dollar, there is something about buying power when you have, 60,000 students and you need, a certain number of desks or pencils or pads of paper or whatever. The district is able to use that to get items at a lower cost. And so, I think when, in the case of charter schools, though, that money does go with the child to that charter school. And so, of course, because of that, you lose some of that buying power. I mean, let's face it, if a school were to lose 20 students, let's say, to a charter school or whatever, arguably that's one less teacher. The problem is, if they lose 20 students, they're probably not all coming from the same grade level. And so that doesn't really give you the ability to reduce staff. You still have the building, you still have to provide the electricity and clean the school and do all those other things that you've always done. So there really isn't a savings, if you will, to the district in that kind of scenario. So, that becomes a problem. And, the other thing that often gets overlooked is that charter schools are given a lot more freedom from state law that public schools aren't given. And class size is one of those examples. Public schools have to meet class size. Charter schools don't really have to. They have an out, essentially, where they don't have to meet it at the stringent level that public schools do. And so, that seems to be an inequity that financially advantages those charter schools. And then there are some other requirements as well that they don't have to meet.
Now, it has been continually stated that the private schools do not have to test their students, especially in terms of FCAT and the like. Is that still the case?
That is still the case. Some charter schools do some kind of assessment, but they don't have to report it. They don't have to say, our students were an A, students or anything like
As
that.
we see with all the public schools,
Yeah,
they're
exactly.
A through an F or
They're
whatever.
great, and with a moving target, mind you. I mean, there's been this whole issue around Commissioner of Education Tony Bennett, who just resigned abruptly because, you know, there's some questions about how he manipulated the grading system, allegedly manipulated the grading system in Indiana before he lost the election there and then got hired down here. I kind of like the guy, you know, in my dealings with him. You know, he seemed like an interesting guy, but you know, even here, there's issues with how we're grading students. We continue, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. When you decide you want to start exercising, you know, maybe you don't exercise like I don't do it enough, let's put it that way. And you want to start exercising, you don't say, you know, today I'm going to go out and I'm going to, you know, do a nice slow walk for half a mile, and then tomorrow I'm going to go run 40 miles. I mean, you just don't do that. You work your way up. You may walk a half a mile today, and you may do that all week. And then next week you might come back, and maybe I'll do it to 3/4 of a mile. Or then I'll increase it to a mile. And then I'll increase the pace, and you keep doing that over the course of time. Well, in the realm of public education, we seem to go from one extreme to the other. So, you know, we ratchet up these we ratchet up the expectations and the standards so quickly that it's not possible. It is really truly setting our students and our schools up for failure. And that's not good for the kids, that's not good for our schools, certainly not good for our community, and that's what we're finding is constantly happening. And so, you know, there's criticism because the state put in place to ensure that no school dropped more than one letter grade. Well, if they hadn't done that, there would have been so many schools that would have been F schools, not because the schools are doing any poorer than they were. In fact, they could be doing better, but because we decided as a state, or someone decided, I shouldn't say we, someone decided that this state's going to ratchet up the expectations at a high rate. You know, we see this drop in letter grades and stuff like that. And we did still see a drop in Volusia County and then across the state. And it's largely because of that ratcheting up in an unrealistic way for how we're going to do that. And when you have the game and you have the rules changing every day, you know, it's kind of hard to know what you're supposed to be doing. And that's what we've had, and we've had inconsistency in the Commissioner of Education's office. 3 Commissioner of Education's office in 3 years, 3 Commissioners of Education in 3 years, plus 2 interim, and now a 3rd interim who's actually, she's serving the 2nd time as an interim. But, you know, so basically, you know, you wonder why we can't figure out what we're supposed to be doing. And I got to tell you, as someone who deals with when we're dealing together with our district with DOE, you can't get straight answers. You get different answers. It depends on the day of the week kind of scenario, because there's just been this constant chaos up there.
And lack of consistency. Let me say real quickly that you're listening to Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards. My guest, of course, is Andrew Spar, who's the president of the Volusia Teachers Organization. And we're talking about education, of course. This is WLE BIG, BIG, 1380 AM on your radio dial in Ormond Beach, Florida. And we're glad to have you with us. One of the things that I was thinking about as you were talking about the lack of consistency, and I think our employers can relate to this as well, because even when we look at development, economic development in an area, employers will not go to an area where there isn't some consistency in terms of how decisions are made, consistency in terms of the rules of the game, consistency in terms of what they're really going to see and have to deal with in terms of their investment in an area. And employers, in terms of the decisions that they make on a day-to-day basis, are really stalemated when there's a lack of consistency. And, you know, translate that into what's happening in terms of education. Educators cannot afford to do that. You have to continue to do whatever it is that you have to do, focusing on the child, on the students, even when you don't get the answers that you want. And it's not, I'm sure, that you make them up as you go along, but you've got to, if there's a void in terms of how do we do this, you've got to come up with something that's acceptable, maybe in terms of the school board, in terms of your organization and the like, that's acceptable, and then share that with everyone that's involved, all of those thousands of people that's tied in with it, and then move forward. But it looks like every time, this has been happening for almost a decade now, every time you look around in terms of what you're saying, we're looking at some change in the standards, we're looking at some new way of doing something, and I'm not knocking, No Child Left Behind. It looks like they're trying to get rid of that. We've got, Race to the Top, in terms of the federal level.
So much
I
going
mean,
on.
constant change, and I know change is inevitable, but there's change that we can control and change that we can't. And it looks like that we can control, the legislature is controlling it and constantly changing.
Yeah, we're seeing that at both the state and national level, and it creates chaos in our district. Last year was an extremely difficult, extremely chaotic year. The worst year I've ever seen in education in Volusia County, and last year was my 18th year, and now my 19th year in Volusia County. What concerns me is this devaluing of the profession. And, students need, what we've seen over the years is that when you create consistency in schools, you create success. And there is something to be said about experience. But what you see, in any field, who wants to be operated on by a doctor who's doing this for the first time without anyone helping? You don't want that. When you go see a doctor and you have to have surgery, you want to hear from that doctor that they've done this surgery, a million times. They can do it in their sleep, kind of thing. Experience matters. When you go to a lawyer, you want the lawyer that's got that track record, that has proven that they have that track record. When you go to wherever it may be, you want people who are experienced. When you go to the checkout line, even at Publix, that new cashier who's kind of trying to figure it out, maybe a little bit slower, and you're in a rush. You don't want to go there. You want to go to the person who knows what they're doing.
Absolutely.
And here we are saying, as a state, experience doesn't matter in public education. It absolutely does. There is not a teacher out there who will tell you that they were as good on day one as they were in their 5th year or their 10th year, because we believe in getting better at what we do all the time, in growing and in learning and improving our craft. Now, do things happen on occasion with anyone in any field, a midlife crisis, a major life event, life-changing event that might have happened that causes a bump in the road, or that maybe they don't have a very good year. That's true in any industry. But that doesn't mean that all of our teachers who have this experience should be discredited at all. We value the fact and we should value the fact that we want to keep quality teachers in our schools. And that's why I always say we should be talking about retention and then recruitment, not recruitment and then retention. It should be the first thing we focus on. If we retain teachers, we're less likely to have to replace them. And the cost is staggering. When you look at how much it costs to bring a teacher in, to train them, to give them all the resources, and then to only have them leave. Over 50% of teachers leave in their first 5 years. That's not something we should be proud of. No business would be proud of saying, I have a turnover rate of 50% in the first 5 years of
Now, is that in Volusia County, or is that overall?
That's Volusia County, that's everywhere too.
Wow.
Volusia County is no different. I talked about the fact that we're hiring a lot of teachers this year. I think by the time it's said and done, we'll hire over 500 teachers this year in Volusia County, and throughout the year. And that's because we have a lot of teachers leaving. We have the highest number of retirements I can recall at any point in time in the last decade. I know we have, we're probably approaching about 150 teachers who decided to retire this year, when in a typical year it's around, maybe 60 to 80. So we're, doubling that number or more.
And we should say that that's not just due to anything happening locally. That's what's happening at the state level.
It's everything compounding. It's the issue of how teachers are being treated from lawmakers, from the national level and the state level. It's how the district reacts to certain things. It's a combination of factors that come into play here, and so it should be alarming to all of us, quite honestly. When you talk about 500 teachers out of 4,200 teachers, it's a pretty big percent.
Yes.
And so we should be concerned about that, and we should be talking about how do we then address that, how do we solve that challenge, how do we move forward to make sure that we have the best. The other thing that we've done to devalue the profession is we did away with tenure. And while people have portrayed tenure as this job for life, it is absolutely not true. What tenure did is it allowed teachers to stand up and make sure they spoke up for students who they thought were being shortchanged. Find me someone who's going to risk their job to make sure someone else isn't shortchanged. If they bring up the fact that a kid isn't getting what they're supposed to, and they're told, listen, you bring it up again, you're going to be out of a job, they're not going to bring it up again. So this is a disservice to our students, but it's a disservice to us as a profession as well because of this. Teachers are the only profession I know of where you're given a contract that has an end date every year, and that the employer must take action to keep you employed. Teachers are employed, and when they get a contract, their first year, and now forever on, it says your contract ends on the last day of school. And if we want to keep you employed, we'll let you know.
Wow.
And if we don't want to keep you employed, you're done. And we don't have to give you a reason. You can be a rated, highly effective teacher, but we don't want to keep you anymore.
See, now that's uncertainty that ties to inconsistency that really impacts that person's psyche, if nothing else.
Right. And the thing about it that to me is very concerning is that we're not creating a sense of loyalty or a sense that we want to keep people here. And this is not just Volusia County, this is a statewide issue, And so, now we're creating a scenario where maybe I got a job in Volusia County, which pays less than Seminole County and less than Flagler County, and so I get a job there for a couple of years, and now I'm going to go to Seminole County, or now I'm going to go to Flagler County, where I can make more money, because, what do I need to stay here for? There's nothing keeping me here. There's nothing, making it a scenario where, I would want to stay here.
Because they're not showing me that I'm valued.
No, and I will tell you that the other thing, I had a teacher tell me that recently that they went to try to get a mortgage. They've been in our district for 4 years. They went to try to get a mortgage, and they were turned down by the bank because the bank wouldn't count their job as a permanent job because it has an end date every year. And so they wouldn't consider it a permanent job. They told me until they had been in it for 10 years because of what's happened with the banking industry. Now it used to be, if you had a temporary job, if you kept it for more than 3 years, they would keep it.
Right.
And I know a lot of banks have increased that to maybe 5 years or what have you. And I have to tell her to go look at another bank. But this notion that we're really putting our teachers in a position where they don't have that sense of stability. And here's the thing about tenure. Tenure didn't mean you couldn't fire someone. It meant you had to have due process. You had to give them a reason. You couldn't just say,
which is true of any job.
Yeah, pretty much most jobs. If you don't give someone a reason, they may go and sue you. But it was that kind of thing, and it just said it didn't mean we did get rid of teachers who weren't performing well. Now sometimes things weren't done properly. We didn't have a good enough evaluation system in place. We're working on improving that, but we didn't have a good enough evaluation system in place where you could really say, this teacher isn't performing and this teacher really needs to go. That was the problem. What we did, what the state did by doing away with any kind of due process rights, is they basically have devalued the profession, made it much more unstable, and still haven't solved the problem of identifying those teachers who may not be performing up to par. Because it could just be that you're a friendly person, you get along with everyone, you do what you're told, you step up anytime someone wants, but you're a lousy teacher and you get to keep your job, versus someone who gets results in the classroom, motivates students, has them engaged, but says no one too many times. That's not how this game should be played. It becomes much more political, it puts students more at risk, and quite honestly, I really do get concerned with teachers being more afraid to speak up on behalf of students because they may lose their job that they otherwise would have done had they had some kind of protection. So with that, we're in negotiations, and we put forward language similar to what they have in Seminole County and what they're trying to get and will probably get in Flagler County, that says if a teacher has had 3 years of good evaluations, rated effective or highly effective, we should guarantee them employment the next year, provided there's not a budget issue. If we're saying we need to invest in evaluations and start doing it, and we're saying this is a good teacher, why wouldn't we keep them?
Right.
But we don't have to, and in some cases we haven't. And so that's a concern. And we should be addressing that, because we're putting an awful lot of money into training teachers, and if they're performing, why wouldn't we keep them? So that's something we put forward, and if we don't do that, what concerns me is now, not only can they go to Seminole County and make more money, they can go to Seminole County and make more money and have job protection, and a little bit of security, not ironclad security, they never had that, but a little bit more security than they have here in Volusia County. And that really will tell me what's going to happen is we're going to become the donor county. People will come here when they couldn't get a job somewhere else, and as soon as they hone their craft a bit, they're gone. And I don't think that's good for Volusia County schools. I don't think it's good for our students, for sure. And I don't think it's good for the profession.
And one of the things we've not talked about, which is so true, the students do get attached to their teachers.
Absolutely.
I mean, that is the person who becomes a role model, and I'm saying parents, you should be role models too, but a teacher is a role model. And that is the person who helps that student, helps to mold them into the type of adult that we would all be desirous of them becoming. So there's an issue with that. Before we go off the air though, I want to talk about parents. What is it that parents should be doing? And I know we hear a lot about the protections that parents have. I know that there's a lot of information people don't understand. There's a lot of confidentiality involved with education in terms of sharing about students, their grades, this, that, and the other. But what is it that parents should be paying particular attention to as it relates to their child in school?
Well, we encourage parents all the time to ask questions, to communicate with their teacher. Communication is a two-way street. The parents worrying about their child or a few children, or whatever they may have in terms of that. A teacher is going to have, depending on the level that they're teaching in an elementary school, they could have 18 students in a high school, they could have 150 students in the course of the day, or more. And so, so it really does help a lot when parents are engaged and they're reaching out and trying to determine, how is their child doing, what else can they do to help their child, asking those kinds of questions, communicating with the parent when their child is struggling, seems to be struggling at home with homework, communicating with the teacher rather, when their child is struggling at home with homework, so that they can say, okay, here are some things you can do to help. Just being that parent, even simple things, asking your child when they come home, so how was school today?
Yeah.
What did you do? What did you learn? What was math like today? What are you doing in reading? Those kinds of things have a huge impact on students, and they're so simple to do. The school district has their slogan, I forget what they call it now, but it's basically being in touch with your Be There. It's called the Be There campaign. Be there for your children. And they talk about that thing. Instead of driving home in the car where you're on the cell phone and your kid's listening to their iPod, unplug from everything for a little while when your kid gets in the car and spend the car ride home talking to your child.
Which is the best time really to communicate with your children on the way to school and back to school, if you transport them.
Sometimes my daughter my oldest usually gets on the bus in the morning, but sometimes I will drive her to school, and we talk the whole way to school. She's telling me about everything that's going on, and things that, even though I talked to her the night before, it's amazing what I hear in the morning that she thinks about on the way to school. Or in the afternoon on days when I pick her up, I know we talk all the time. My wife does the same thing. It's just talking. So how was school? What are some of the things?
And it's opening lines of communication with your children and maintaining that open line. Yeah.
There's a great cartoon out there that I think is so true today. And it shows a picture, it's a cartoon of a picture of these parents. There's a teacher sitting at the desk, there's these parents and this child, and the child's got an F, and it says like 1970s or whatever it was, or 1980s, and it's got the parents holding up the test that has an F on it. They're yelling at the child, scolding the child, and then today, it shows the picture of today, and it's got the picture of the student with the F, and they're yelling at the teacher. And it's that kind of thing. The reality of it is, students get the grades they earn, and we as teachers have an obligation to do what we can to help them be successful, but parents have that obligation, the community has that obligation, the business community has that obligation.
And we have to value education,
We
that's
do.
what it comes down to.
We have to show that it's important. We have to, you know, if we as a community and we as parents don't respect the teachers, then how do we expect our children to do that?
That's right.
And if our children don't respect their teachers, they're not going to learn what they need to learn. You know, even those teachers who may not be the strongest teachers, maybe they're new, maybe they're struggling at that point in time, even those teachers aren't the strongest teachers. It's still not a reason to disrespect them or what's going on.
Right.
It's important that you
Respect
continue to
authority.
engage, that you can continue to try to support what's going on in the classroom and support the teacher. You know, and it's a good lesson for students to learn, because you know what? Sometimes they're going to have a boss that does something they don't like, and they don't get to, you know, there's not much they can do about it. They don't get the opportunity to call mommy and say, do something with my boss. Because what the boss is probably going to do when mom calls and says, yeah, your child doesn't like that, I got a solution for that. I'll just go fire him.
Right.
All right, you know, that's what's going to happen. You know, we have to learn to deal with the situations that we have. We should always have the best teacher in front of them. We should do everything we can to make sure that happens. But even the best teacher for the majority of kids may not be the best teacher for a particular child. And so that's something we have to look at.
In our last minute, is there anything we've not covered? I know there's a lot, but anything else that you'd like to ensure that our listeners are aware of in terms of education?
I will just say this. Schools start in a little over a week. When your child goes to school and when the school year starts, communicate with the teacher and thank them for everything that they do. They really would appreciate hearing that, and you'd be surprised that that would go a long way. Be that engaged parent, be that parent who continues to support their child and support our teachers and support our schools. And if we do that, we're going to start to see a real improvement in what we're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. They said, what is it? It takes a village to raise a child. It takes the entire community, and you mentioned all of those different legs to the table that it takes for us to come together, work together to ensure successful young people who will become successful adults.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And
well, thanks for having me, Gwen. It's been fun, as always.
Yes, and thank you, and just a shout out to all of those who are part of our educational system. Our teachers and instructors, our parents who are so key and important, the students, and our school board, and then all of those who even are above the local level, because it truly does take all of us coming together, working together, and staying focused on the child or the student. So shout out to all of you, and our hope and prayer for a very successful and safe this year's term, which starts for Volusia and Flagler County on Monday, August the 19th. And special thank you to you, Andrew, and to all of those who are working together to ensure that we have the highest quality education that we can have. It's not easy, but it really does take, as you've stated, and as I continue to say as well, all of us, it takes all of us coming together and working together to make that happen. The entire community, the entire makeup of the community. So thank you all, and thank you to our listeners, and be sure to join us every Thursday starting at 6:15 or when we boot the big guy out of the chair to listen to truth, and go to the website at www.gwen-truth.com so you can again access all those resource listings, and remember to you know, as we go about our day, if you've dropped your young person out at school, or you're a grandparent, you've dropped them off, or you just know that there are students that are a part of our school system, and all of those who are a part of it, let's keep them in prayer, because, you know, the world is becoming a less safe place, and we want to ensure that all of these young people and all of those who are part of their lives continue to play a positive role in their lives, and that we not have some of what has happened in the past year. We're going to put that behind us and just think positively for the year to come. Again, this is Truth with Gwen Azama-Edwards, and like you, like Andrew, and all of our teachers and the like, we're still standing. You be blessed and have a great week.
Truth with your host, Gwen Azama-Edwards, exclusively every Thursday night on WEL.